So today our speakers are Dr. Christopher Buck and Mr. Michael Orona, and they'll be speaking about Abdu'l-Bahá on the spiritual heritage of Indigenous peoples. Dr. Christopher Buck publishes broadly as an independent scholar in a wide range of fields, including American Studies, Native American Studies, African American Studies, Religious Studies, Islamic Studies, and Bahá'í Studies. His Ph.D. from the University of Toronto is in the academic study of religions, and his law degree is from the Western Michigan University Thomas M. Cooley Law School. Mr. Michael Orona has served for over 20 years in senior level foreign policy positions at the U.S. Department of State in Washington, D.C. This includes serving at the White House as National Security Council Director and the U.S. Embassy in Vietnam, where he negotiated the release of 3 prisoners of conscience. So now we're going to have a prayer.
Yes, good afternoon, everyone. And before I offer today's prayer, I want to thank Modern Baha'i Perspectives for hosting today's presentation. And I also want to thank my co-author and fellow presenter and brother, Dr. Christopher Buck, for inviting me to join him on this incredible and groundbreaking journey in conducting the research and drafting this article. And I offer today's prayer in Apache and in English in honor of our elders who have gone forth, Patricia Locke, Kevin Locke, and Dr. Joel Orona, Indigenous Baha'is who faced hardship, success, and challenges in teaching and promoting the belief of how Indigenous peoples have always had spiritual prophets, and in doing so, paved the way for Chris and me to do this research. And I offer this Apache prayer. Bikekunda ninasha, bikekunda nibika, isishu negosai. Is there any remover of difficulties save God? Say, praise be God, he is God. All are his servants, and all abide by his bidding. The Bab.
Thank you. And now this is a quotation from Shoghi Effendi from the Baha'i Faith. If the light of divine guidance enters properly into the lives of the Indians, it will be found that they will arise with a great power and will become an example of spirituality and culture to all of the people in these countries. So now I invite Dr. Buck and Mr. Orona to take it away.
Thanks to you, Paymone, and also to your dear mother, Parveen Parhami, for hosting this special presentation. I am honored to co-present with my esteemed brother and colleague, Michael Orona. So I want to welcome the audience, the viewers who are out there. Remember, there's a chat function. You can type questions in if you like. There'll be hopefully plenty of time for a rich and meaningful Q&A discussion following this presentation. This presentation is based on a 2005 journal article. What we mean by a journal article is an academic article that's peer-reviewed. It is open access, meaning that there is not a paywall. In other words, anyone can view it online. This PowerPoint presentation will be uploaded. I will upload this after the presentation today. And when this is posted on YouTube by the Modern Perspectives team, it will contain a link to the PowerPoint presentation so that those of you who are interested can study it in detail. On the PowerPoint slides, when you see an underline, it means it's hot linked. And so if you click on the PDF where it's linked, it'll take you there online. This is how the article looks like when you download the PDF. It's also available to read directly online. The title is Abdu'l-Bahá's Tablet to Amir Khan, Expanding the Scope of the Baha'i Doctrine of Progressive Revelation to Include and Engage Indigenous Spiritual Traditions. This is part of a special issue called the Baha'i Faith Doctrinal and Historical Explorations. It says part 2. You could think of it as volume 2 because last year Volume 1 was published, and it is available also as a book, which can be ordered directly from the publisher, MDPI. The guest editors for this special issue are Dr. Robert Stockman and Dr. Mujan Momin. For those of you who may not know too much about Abdu'l-Bahá, here's my favorite photograph of Abdu'l-Bahá taken on December 12th, 1912 in New York by a celebrity photographer named Jacob Schloss. This version of the photograph is courtesy of the Bahá'í Media Bank. The original archival photographs have Jacob Schloss's signature and copyright notice on the photograph itself. There's a painting based on this photograph right outside the chamber of the Universal House of Justice on Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel. For those of you who would like to find out more about this photograph and what Abdu'l-Bahá said on December 2nd, 1912, there was an earlier Baha'i Faith Modern Perspectives presentation on July 5th called Universal Peace. In which book is this? How and why Abdu'l-Bahá identified new and distinctive Baha'i principles. All right, we're going to get to the tablet to Amir Khan in terms of what we have to present in the article momentarily. But first, I want to show the addressee, how the tablet was addressed to the recipient, Amir Khan. And this image is the tablet itself, which is courtesy of the Baha'i World Center. You see at the bottom left-hand corner, the signature by the initials Ain, standing for Abbas Effendi, which is how Abdu'l-Bahá signed his name. I'd like to preface this talk, or Michael and I would like to preface this talk with a disclaimer. That's a fancy scholarly term for a qualifying statement. That's how the Oxford English Dictionary defines disclaimer. And here's our disclaimer.
Yes, Chris,
Michael?
glad to read that. Thank you. The authors declare that their investigation, findings, and opinions as set forth below represent their own informed ideas as a result of their collaborative inquiry and do not represent any official pronouncement on behalf of the Baha'i Faith and its institutions. Rather, the authors respectfully offer the results of their investigation as a contribution to public discourse on this and related matters of interest.
Thank you. I was asked in an interview earlier this year on a very interesting podcast called High Strangeness whether the Baha'i Faith has any clergy. My answer was, look at my tie. The Baha'i Faith has no clergy. So I just wanted to add that to our disclaimer. Now, the format for this presentation is we will read a highlight of part of the article that we will highlight with a scan from the article itself. So this is the pattern. We will present our highlight that we want to read to you first, then followed by what it looks like in the article. The reference is page 3 of 24 of Abdu'l-Bahá's tablet to Amir Khan, meaning the article itself. All right, we would like to dedicate, Michael, why don't you take over here?
Yes, Chris, thank you for that. Well, Chris and I are absolutely honored to dedicate today's presentation and the article to three amazing individuals, and I'm honored to share a brief introduction and privileged to say that I've had the honor, and I know Chris has as well, to know these individuals, to work with them directly. And all three of these individuals hold a rich legacy of service to the faith and indigenous peoples around the world. Let me start with Patricia Locke. Patricia of the Standing Rock Sioux and of the Hunkpapa descent is also of White Earth Chippewa and was a Native American educator, activist, and former MacArthur Fellow. Patricia also served on the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. And next is Kevin Locke. Kevin is, of course, her son. Kevin is of Lakota descent of the Standing Rock Sioux, was a famous player of the Native American flute, a traditional storyteller, recording artist, educator, well-known hoop dancer, and of course, a cultural ambassador around the world. And next is Dr. Joel Orona of Chehe-Inde Apache descent. Dr. Orona was a Vietnam veteran, held a Ph.D. in educational psychology, was a poet and a traditional storyteller, and served as president of the Arbor Institute, director of the Black Hawk Native American Center in Chicago, and later served as co-director of the Native American Bahá'í Institute in Arizona. And we dedicate today's presentation to these remarkable servants.
Thank you, Michael. Here's another scholarly term that's used often in academic articles, abstract. That's an abstract term for sure. Here it means summary. Michael, is it my turn?
Yes, Chris, go ahead.
The Baha'i doctrine of progressive revelation, while universal in principle, has been limited in scope and application by Arya Semitocentrism to the relative exclusion of indigenous religions. Abdu'l-Bahá's tablet to Amir Khan may offer a solution and resolution, to wit, quote, undoubtedly, in those regions, referring to the Americas, the call of God must have been raised in ancient times, but it hath been forgotten now. This paper provides an exegesis of the tablet to Amir Khan, an authenticated, authoritative Baha'i text with an authorized translation. And just to let you know, this term, Arya Semitocentrism, was coined in collaboration with Dr. Don Addison, the late Dr. Addison, who was Choctaw heritage, and who gave me this medallion that I'm wearing today in our presentation. And another term or expression, to wit, I've been practicing as an attorney as well as publishing as an independent scholar. I'm a former university professor, but to wit is used a lot, meaning namely, or this is what I'm talking about. To wit is a legal expression. To continue on our abstract, our premise, Michael, why don't you do this?
Our basic premise is that just as Abdu'l-Bahá has added the Buddha and Krishna to the list, the Baha'i list of manifestations of God, Abdu'l-Bahá has also added the principle of indigenous messengers of God to the Americas without naming principles, i.e., the names of individual indigenous wise ones, thereby demonstrating that Abdu'l-Bahā's tablet to Amir Khan effectively expands the scope of the Baha'i doctrine of progressive revelation to include and engage indigenous spiritual traditions.
And that's what it looks like from the article. All right, another academic term, epigraphs. It's not epitaphs, it's epigraphs, meaning opening quotes. Michael?
Yes, and this is honor to read this quote by Patricia Locke. The premise of this paper is that God did not neglect the millions of indigenous peoples of the Western Hemisphere, and that over the centuries, a myriad of messengers of God were sent to various Indian nations to bring them divine theologies, of which many have survived and are practiced today. For centuries, the indigenous peoples of the Americas have been intensely religious and spiritual. And also from my younger brother, Roman Orona, I read the following. Most importantly, we have prophecies. People don't understand that indigenous peoples have prophecies, and we also have prophets.
Important statement. Thank you, Michael. And that's what the epigraph looks like in the article. We're going to go section by section again, briefly highlighting major statements in the article. Beginning with section 1, the introduction, the importance of indigenous issues and insights from a global perspective. Michael?
Yes, Chris. Two-eyed seeing. Two-eyed seeing stresses the importance of viewing the world through one eye using the strengths of indigenous worldviews, and with the other eye using the strengths of Western worldviews to see together with both eyes to benefit all. A weaving of perspectives is emphasized with both having equal importance, but acknowledging that in some instances, one perspective may further our understanding of a specific concept or situation more than the other.
Thank you, Michael. So this is the methodology, the decolonizing methodology, as scholars say, that Michael and I have adopted. The next section, the tablet to Amir Khan, introduction, context, text, interpretations, and applications. Michael?
Sir, I believe this is for you, Chris. This is yours.
Okay. This is a statement from actually two separate statements from the late Kevin Locke, who passed away suddenly and unexpectedly on September 30th, 2022. I was in Istanbul at the time on my way to pilgrimage with my family. Throughout my pilgrimage, I said intensive prayers for Kevin and his dear wife and daughter. The tablet to Amir Khan for Baha'is is kind of like the Holy Grail. When Abdu'l-Bahá says that, quote, undoubtedly in those regions, the Americas, the call of God must have been raised in ancient times, but it has been forgotten now. Another statement by Kevin Locke, for the immigrant populations and indigenous folks who have been cut off from their spiritual heritage, Abdu'l-Bahā's tablet to Amir Khan is a touchstone that opens doors of understanding to the true history of this land. And by immigrants, Kevin means the European settlers. That's how it appears in the article. The next section is called Amir Khane Maghaze Ahan, recipient of Abdu'l-Bahā's tablet. And this is courtesy of Dr. Iraj Iman, who passed away earlier this year. God bless his pure and deep soul. Dr. Iman says, Amir Khan of Tehran refers to a Bahá'í known as Amir Khan Ahan. He is the recipient of a famous tablet of Abdu'l-Bahá in response to his submission, asking his guidance on what line he should pursue due to his many different interests. The master advises him to concentrate on one line, otherwise his talent and energies will be wasted. Amir Khan was an artist and wanted to know which form of art or craft he should pursue, and this was the advice he received. But in addition to this question, he asked some other questions. The next section, authenticated original Persian Arabic text of the tablet to Amir Khan. The tablet to Amir Khan is an authenticated tablet and therefore an authoritative Bahá'í primary source. that is accepted as scripture within the Baha'i canon, with an authorized translation. Here I should say partial translation. In peer-reviewed scholarship, the appellation or name Tablet to Amir Khan apparently was first used in Buck 1996. It is conveniently cataloged as AB, which stands for Abdu'l-Bahá, 05069, Tablet to Amir Khan by Stephen Phelps in his A Partial Inventory of the Works of the Central Figures of the Baha'i Faith, which is a wonderful, magnificent resource, a picture of which is here. It's available for download. This is the May 2025 version. Here's the entry on the tablet to Amir Khan. The following table was created by Adib Masumian on co-author Buck's request and is reproduced here with permission in an adapted format. And the name of the table is Tablet to Amir Khan, Text, Transliteration, Translation. Transliteration means representing the Persian Arabic original in Latin characters. And there's the table. And you'll see that on the left-hand column is the Persian Arabic text. The middle is the column is the transliteration. And the English translation, combining a provisional translation by courtesy of Dr. Omid Qaim Maghami, and then the authorized translation courtesy of the Baha'i World Center is represented in this chart. The next section is the authorized translation of Abdu'l-Bahá's tablet to Amir Khan. Michael?
Yes, the extract from a tablet of Abdu'l-Bahá. In ancient times, the people of America were, through their northern regions close to Asia, that is, separated from Asia by a strait. For this reason, it hath been said that crossing had occurred. There are other signs which indicate communication. As to places whose people were not informed of the appearance of prophets, such people are excused. In the Quran, it hath been revealed, and quote, we will not chastise them if they had not been sent a messenger, end quote. Undoubtedly, in those regions, the call of God must have been raised in ancient times, but it hath been forgotten now. Abdu'l-Bahá.
Thank you, Michael. Al-Batay, undoubtedly, absolute certainty. I want to stress that term. It's very important. Would you like to read this, Michael?
Thank you, Chris. And again, underscoring again, as Chris just did, undoubtedly, in those regions, the call of God must have been raised in ancient times, is a positive, emphatic response indicating absolute certainty. As for the expression, the call of God, Nida-i ilahi, this key expression first and foremost refers to the message brought by a messenger of God, as the following Baha'i text demonstrate.
The next section is the Daganawida epic as a prime exemplar, validating the tablet to Amir Khan. As independent scholar Nejati Al-Khan also observes, quote, it sounds to me that the peacemaker, that's the term associated with Daganawida, did raise the call of God in ancient times. That is, in the pre-contact era before the Europeans came to America. It rings true. It fits Abdu'l-Bahá's description in the tablet to Amir Khan perfectly. There's no question that Daganawida's teachings are profound. They resonate powerfully with Baha'i teachings. They are in harmony. They echo each other. The next section is review of prior scholarship on Abdu'l-Bahá's tablet to Amir Khan. And this is a quote from Dr. Mujan Momin, who edited this paper along with Dr. Robert Stockman, and the volume that's posted online this year, part 2 of the Baha'i Faith Doctrinal and Historical Explorations. Dr. Momin says, there is in fact a statement from Abdu'l-Bahá referring to America to the effect that, quote, undoubtedly in those regions, the call of God must have been raised in ancient times. I would argue that this is the equivalent of Abdu'l-Bahá acknowledging the existence of American manifestations of God. And I added a statement to this effect to the article, American Indian Religion and the Baha'i Faith, that was intended for the Baha'i Encyclopedia. The article was never published. That's a long story. But Mujan Momin and his wife, Dr. Wendy Momin, were editing the articles intended for publication in the Baha'i Encyclopedia, which was under the auspices of the National Spiritual Assembly of the Baha'is of the United States. The next section, the tablet to Amir Khan, an Indigenous American viewpoint. Michael?
Yes, Chris, thank you for that. And just to let folks know, I previously introduced Dr. Orona as one of the 3 individual Indigenous Baha'is that we dedicate today's presentation to. In the poem On Medicine Men, J. Orona, 2019, pages 14 to 15, Dr. Orona's work serves as a bridge between ancient wisdom and contemporary challenges by acknowledging the important role previous indigenous manifestations of God, referred to here in this poem as medicine men, have played in the spiritual development of indigenous communities. And I am honored to read my late father's work on this. And this is his poem On Medicine Men, the Manifestations. Where are the medicine men? Not the medicine of bottled pills with speed, convenience, and flair, but those guiders of virtue and honor. Instead, we have the firm, gripped to put out the word, if it's too little, too fast, or too much. Who is there to cure the side effects? Where are the medicine men to bear new generations with simple truths born of ancient wisdom? Not the money, pastor, priest, or shaman, but those spirits of detachment, imparting light as a candle in the darkness. Where are the medicine men, wise through progressive revelations that pierced 1,000 riddles and cured 10,000 ills? Discredited and disavowed, they've been left to teach in backwaters, where wealth dumps its refuse, where firms and congregations don't invest. Still, their antidote is never censored, for sordid hearts seek their elixir, and wounded souls petition for their balm. Having drank from pure streams, inhale the essence of verdant fields, and taking in all learning from the 4 directions the hills give passage. To these medicine men, who come in every era amidst the clamor and confusion, bestowing the gifts of wonderment. Dr. Joel Orona.
Next, we look at 2 remarkable promises or prophecies by Abdu'l-Bahá, read together as one. Michael?
Yes, this is from section 3.1 of our article, as Chris mentioned. 2 remarkable promises by Abdu'l-Bahá read together as one. Abdu'l-Bahá offered two remarkable promises about America and its inhabitants. The first statement foretells what is often referred to by Baha'is as the destiny of America. The American continent gives signs and evidences of very great advancement. Its future is even more promising, for its influence and illumination are far-reaching, and it will lead all nations spiritually.
Thank you, Michael. That was stated on May 6th, 1912 in Cleveland, the day before Abdu'l-Bahá spoke in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, at the invitation of a rabbi. Michael?
Yes, there has been much discussion about the promise, yet none of these readings so far appear to have sufficiently incorporated, if at all, other extraordinary promises by Abdu'l-Bahá, which is focused on the destiny of the indigenous population of America. And I quote, "Attach great importance to the indigenous population of America. Likewise, these Indians, should they be educated and guided, there can be no doubt that they will become so illumined as to enlighten the whole world."
Michael?
These two texts are typically read separately in different contexts. Both promises, however, when read together, appear to state that America is destined to have a significant world role in promoting world unity, such that it will, quote, "lead all nations spiritually," end quote, and that part and parcel of that highly influential and transformative leadership is that the indigenous peoples across the Americas would prospectively enlighten the world.
Michael?
Chris, I believe this is yours, and I'm the next one.
Thank you. This is a statement from the Universal House of Justice, the democratically elected International Baha'i Council, whose seat is on Mount Carmel in Haifa, Israel. Quote, "We cherish the hope that at this final conference, the Friends will arise with enthusiasm and determination, not only to win the remaining goals of the plan, but to carry out Shoghi Effendi's injunction to win the allegiance of members of the various tribes of American Indians to the cause, thereby hastening the period prophesied by the Master when the Indian peoples of America would become a source of spiritual illumination to the world." I want to emphasize here the verb hastening. Prophecies are certain, Baha'i prophecies are certain as to outcome, this is my understanding, but will not come true unless the time is ripe. Therefore, they can be slowed, or they can be, in other words, delayed or hastened. In other words, their fulfillment can be accelerated depending on our efforts. So here, the Universal House of Justice is asking us to work hard in order to hasten the fulfillment of the prophecy by Abdu'l-Bahá that the American Indians, the indigenous peoples of the Americas, would enlighten the world. Michael?
This is also a quote from the Universal House of Justice. "Whether in Alaska's southeastern islands and rugged mountains, or in Canada's huge Indian reserves, from the west to the east, many Amerindian believers have arisen to serve the cause, and through their joint efforts, their sacrificial endeavors, and distinctive talents, they bid fair to accelerate the dawn of the day when they will be so illumined as to enlighten the whole world."
The next section, Abdu'l-Bahá's tablet to Amir Khan, further considerations from an indigenous American. Michael?
Yes, Chris, and thank you, Chris, again for allowing me to be part of this co-authorship of this important article. And Chris made it a point. I need to share this. Chris made it a point several times in the article, if you haven't read it, to come from an Indigenous American Baha'i perspective. It allowed me to use my own perspective and experience. And I really appreciate working with you, Chris, again. Thank you. This is from section 3.2, again from the article, Abdu'l-Bahá's tablet to Amir Khan, further considerations from an Indigenous and American Baha'i perspective. These are my own thoughts. When coupled with Abdu'l-Bahá's writings of America's destiny to, quote, lead all nations spiritually, end quote, and his prophecy of the role Indigenous peoples will play in enlightening the world, it confirms what Indigenous elders have long known, that the spiritual traditions and understanding they have maintained through centuries of hardship carry a profound importance for humanity's collective future.
The next section, the Baha'i Faith and Progressive Revelation. The doctrine, the Baha'i, is it my turn or yours, Michael?
Yours.
The Baha'i doctrine of progressive revelation, while universal in principle, has been limited in scope and application by what has previously been described by the late Don Addison, Choctaw, as Arya-Semitocentrism. Baha'i popular literature often provides a list of manifestations of God which excludes indigenous religions. This is the problematic for which Abdu'l-Bahá's tablet to Amir Khan may offer a solution and resolution. The next section, implications of the tablet to Amir Khan for a wider appreciation of progressive revelation.
That is yours, Chris, as well.
Thank you. In the following sections, a rationale is presented for such recognition of the general category of indigenous messengers of God in the Americas, and possibly by implication in Oceania, Africa, and elsewhere, at the level of principle, without specific acknowledgement of principles, that is, of individual indigenous messengers of God. The next section is Abdu'l-Bahá's inclusion of the Buddha and Krishna as recognized manifestations of God.
Yes, this is from section 5.1. Abdu'l-Bahá's inclusion of Buddha and Krishna as recognized manifestations of God. According to the Universal House of Justice, Abdu'l-Bahá added the Buddha to the list of manifestations of God. This shows that Abdu'l-Bahá had the power of discernment and prerogative authority to add to the list of manifestations of God. And Abdu'l-Bahá added Krishna as well.
This is the conclusion. In the tablet to Amir Khan, Abdu'l-Bahá has added in principle. I think part of this is not displaying. I'm not sure why. Michael?
Yes, Chris. On the authority of the tablet to Amir Khan, the present writers submit that Abdu'l-Bahá has added in principle indigenous messengers of God to the Americas within the sweep and scope of progressive revelation. Here, a distinction can be made between an explicit principle and implicit principles. The present writers suggest, moreover, that the tablet to Amir Khan and the material presented in this paper may initiate and facilitate a discussion on moving beyond surface level interchanges to a fundamental transformation of how Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities interact based on mutual respect, recognition of rights and sovereignty, and genuine partnership in building a shared future.
Conclusion, the tablet to Amir Khan, a major authoritative work for diverse audiences.
I'm glad to share this last final slide. The tablet to Amir Khan stands as a pivotal and authoritative text within Baha'i scripture that has gained recognition across diverse academic and indigenous communities for its revolutionary approach to indigenous spiritual traditions. This authenticated work, with its authorized translation, addresses a fundamental gap in current religious discourse by expanding the Baha'i doctrine of progressive revelation to explicitly include indigenous messengers of God in the Americas.
That's it, folks. Time for Q&A. Again, we want to thank the hosts of our Baha'i Faith Modern Perspectives team for allowing us to present this fruit of our research.
Great. Thank you so much, both of you. We really enjoyed your talk. Really appreciate your time. So now we have time for Q&A, and people can put their questions in the chat. The first question is, who was Amir Khan?
Amir Khan was a businessman. He owned a shop, a hardware store. He imported lots of goods. And the location of his business in Tehran is on a famous commercial avenue. He also was an inventor. He traveled to Europe and I believe Russia to market his inventions. He was a colorful man that was friends with Dr. Iraj Ayman's father. So he got to see Amir Khan as a child.
Thank you. The next question is, since there was no America, there was no American Indians in the ancient times, do you have accurate information about who were those manifestations in the indigenous world in those times that Abdu'l-Bahá is referring to? Not American prophets, but ancient prophets.
I'd like to invite Michael to respond after this comment. Would you read that part of the question again, that there were not prophets?
Do you have accurate information about who were those manifestations in the indigenous world in those times?
Well, there's a series that the late Kevin and Locke published on BahaiTeachings.org. The series is 109 articles long. So if you Google Indigenous Messengers of God, you will see about 24 of them that we have written about. I'd like to turn this over to Michael.
Yes, Chris, and it goes back to those quotes by Patricia Locke and my brother Roman Orona, again, underscoring the fact that indigenous peoples have always had prophets of God. And in fact, if you go to different traditions, different indigenous traditions, we have our own creation stories. We have our own stories of prophets of God. We have our own stories of manifestations that have lived and have guided us as indigenous peoples for centuries. And these are all not the same because we're all diverse groups and tribes and nations, but we all have these inherent and these traditional spiritual qualities that were given to us by these manifestations. Thank you.
I'd like to, Dr. Lawson, is it okay if I ask you to comment on the verse of the Quran that Abdu'l-Bahá quotes in the tablet to Amir Khan? Audio?
Is there no one can unmute during this?
Oh, I'm
Yeah,
sorry. Forgive me if I spoke out of turn, but at some point I would like to invite Dr. Lawson, if you can uh, cue him in, hey Monet, to talk
Um,
about the verse and if he's willing to do so. Can you set that up?
sorry, what's his name?
Dr. Todd Lawson, T. Lawson, you
Oh,
see on the screen there in the gallery.
yeah, yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Hi. Hello, everyone. Aloha. Beautiful presentation. It was nice to meet you, Michael, and hear your ideas about this very important topic. Thanks, Chris, for asking me to comment that that is I, I didn't prepare anything, but it's an interesting verse in light of several other verses that say, for example, that there's no community on the face of the earth that has not had a manifestation of God. So Abdu'l-Bahá, as a proud citizen of Islamic culture, would have this idea swimming around in his DNA before he ever heard or came to North America. This is a default Islamicate position. Every human community has had a manifestation of God. They, of course, the terminology is not the same. The terminology is prophet and messenger. Uh, it is the Bahá'í faith, after a long development in mystical philosophy, that universalized the notion of manifestation of God or divine manifestation. But it's functionally analogical. They are the same. Prophets and messengers are now referred to as manifestations of God. So it's interesting what sort of literary device the Quran is employing, because it's already said at 14:4 that there's no community that has not been given a messenger of God. And then later in 17:15, I guess it is, it says that there will be no punishment of a community that has not been sent a messenger of God. Could be seen as a rhetorical emphasis of the idea that all communities have been given messengers of God. So that's my sort of shot from the hip commentary. Oh, but if I might put in a commercial for the study of Islam, that is to say that, as everyone knows, especially those who have had the experience of listening to me go on and on and on about it, the Baha'i community was instructed by the Guardian explicitly in 1938, in a letter dated on Christmas Day, 1938, to study Islam, to study the Quran, to study its history, to study its ideas, especially its ideas of spiritual authority that were surrounded. And had we taken this up, we would have already begun asking questions very early on. Isn't this something of an Abrahamic hegemony that is being put forth by this list of prophets that we haul out periodically to talk about progressive revelation? Shouldn't it, if the Baha'i faith represents a progress beyond the Islamic moment, if you will, shouldn't this already be in our quiver? Not to use a bad pun here, but really, we should have been very comfortable with the idea of indigenous manifestations of God long ago. But I mean, by saying this, I don't wish to take away from the beautiful presentation, powerful presentation, much needed presentation that Michael and you just gave us. Perhaps it will inspire us to dig more deeply into the Quran, as the Guardian had already commanded us to do 50, 60, 70 years ago, 80 years ago. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Okay. So let's see other questions. What are the characteristics and timelines of teachings of Indigenous manifestations?
Teachings and timelines through centuries of oral tradition. You're not going to find a book of prophecies. You're not going to find some written book that was, long ago handed down from generation to generation. But these, as Indigenous peoples, not only in Americas, but throughout the world, and we should I want to put a strong emphasis on that as well, looking throughout the world at Indigenous peoples. We tend to see Indigenous peoples here in America as only Native American, but let's be honest, there are over 500 million of us around the world, 500 million and over 90 countries around the world. So with that, this is based on oral traditions, on teachings that were sent and shared from generation to generation and kept through ceremonies and kept private and kept and revered, absolutely revered, and through prayer and through ceremony that were handed down to all of us. So it's not that there are absolutely written there for all of us to view and to see, but they are absolutely most definitely still part of who we are as a people and our foundational beliefs.
If I may add something, some of these oral traditions were committed to writing. A prime example mentioned in the paper is Concerning the League.
Yes.
It's a version of the Daganoweda epic recited in 1912 by Chief John Arthur Gibson, and it was translated by Hanny Woodbury some years later and published by the University of Manitoba Press. I think it belongs to world literature. It reads like scripture. To me, when I first was introduced to the Baha'i faith, the first book of Baha'u'llah's that I read was The Hidden Words of Baha'u'llah. I heard what I thought was the voice of God, and still believe to this day is the voice of God in the hidden words. In much the same way, I hear the voice of divinity speaking through that tradition as set forth in writing in translation in the book Concerning the League.
Let's see. How ancient are the known American indigenous cultures?
Michael?
I would not even attempt to put a number on that, Chris, because going back to what has been written is limiting. It's limiting because you fail to acknowledge how long we've actually been present. The limit is put on the academics, the academicians who came and put a date on that and wrote about it at that time and point in time. But we are beyond anything that has been written.
Are there any more authoritative Baha'i texts about indigenous religions?
Todd Lawson. By the way, Todd, thank you for your previous comments. Would you let Todd add to his comments?
And also, while we do that, I also want to thank Dr. Lawson. Pleasure to meet you and appreciate those words earlier.
Thank you, Michael. It's a great pleasure, honor to meet you and become aware of your father. I hadn't known about his beautiful poetry and his other achievements. I live in Canada, so I'm not in touch. Anyway, you know that there is a defining, controlling parable in the Quran, which is called amongst Muslims the parable or the story of the Day of the Covenant. And in the Quran, this story is as follows. In a place before place, in a time before time, the Great Spirit, if you like, gathered all future souls of humanity. and presented the following question: "Am I not your Lord?" The response was instantaneous from all future spirits of everyone who would ever live on the planet. The response was, "Absolutely. Yea, verily. Of this there is no doubt." This is not a group of Arabs, a group of Persians, a group of indigenous people, a group of Italians. This is all humanity. And this is the bedrock of the Quranic vision of the unity of God, the unity of humanity, and the unity of what we call religion, which we also have as Baha'is, obviously. But in the same way that Baha'u'llah and Abdu'l-Bahá, especially from your presentation, Abdu'l-Bahá, is making explicit that indigenous groups do represent world spiritual history, having had religions, a very pesky word, and manifestations of God. It's raising the discourse and filling out the discourse that is alluded to sometimes in the Quran. But it shows the close connection between the Baha'i teachings and the Quran, and also the absolute universality of divine revelation. It is something about which we must never be skittish or afraid. We must celebrate everyone's manifestations of God, because they go far beyond the usual Abrahamic business, as this great term, what was it, area Semitic, from Addison, was it? Yes, yes. I refer to it as Abrahamic hegemony, but it's all the same. We belong to something called humanity, which has an intimate connection with God that goes back before creation. So now I will stop. Thank you for your patience.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. Is it possible to talk a little bit more about medicine men and their roles?
Yes, absolutely. Again, and the roles that are mentioned in the poem by my late father do highlight those important the roles that medicine men have, and that is teachers of wisdom, of sharing of tradition, sharing of spirituality, leaders in every aspect of a community, of who we are as a people, as historians as well. So it's not only the spiritual aspects and the sharing of culture and ceremony, but also the history. So it's quite an important role that these individuals still play today in our community, and are well respected, as seen as important elders, and sharing this information. Thank you for that question.
Are there any written scripts left from the ancient messengers of America?
Chris?
I think I addressed that
Yeah.
with respect to the Dagon-Awida epic, of which there are a number of versions, all of which are considered authoritative. But my favorite being the one dictated by Chief John Arthur Gibson in 1912, the same year that Abdu'l-Bahá visited North America, the United States and Canada. And there are other not written traditions. There are written traditions if you look at all of the indigenous manuscripts or codices, that's plural for codex, including Mayan script. And we also know that there are ancient petroglyphs, rock carvings, which may or may not be a form of writing. There are different scholarly theories about whether, for example, wampum beads represent a form of writing. So you need to go tradition by tradition. But as Michael said, primarily the indigenous way of life, which includes the spiritual vision of earth and heaven, which is not distinguished from life in general, were communicated from generation to generation. Anthropologists would ask quote unquote informants to tell them about their traditions, and these were committed to writing. But as Michael has counseled me, we must be very careful with how we understand and appreciate and believe or not believe the written work set forth by anthropologists as conveyed to them by their informants. Would you like to comment on that, Michael?
Yes, Chris, thank you. Chris and I've had this ongoing discussion, and it's been an important one for both of us. And as he said, we have to be absolutely very careful because those things that were written or are written sometimes aren't authoritative. Chris mentioned that there are some that are authoritative, and absolutely, and I agree with him as he stated that. But there are some that are not, and there are some that were given and shared through other means and are not authoritative. So we have to be absolutely careful and critical of what is read and when it was written as well, and the era that it was written. Thanks.
Are indigenous manifestations of God considered at the same level as the nine main ones, or are they considered lesser prophets?
Chris and I have had this conversation as well. Chris, you want to share?
I believe in some answered questions, Abdu'l-Bahá talks about two kinds of prophets. And then in the additional tablets by Abdu'l-Bahá, which is available on Baha'i.org in the Baha'i Reference Library, there's a table talk. I think it's a table talk, one of 12, if I'm not mistaken, where Abdu'l-Bahá talks about three kinds of prophets, three levels of manifestations of God. One is local, another is, in effect, under the shadow of a greater manifestation of God. And the highest level, and I emphasize the highest level, would be the equivalent of the high understanding of manifestation of God. In other words, a messenger sent by God with divine authority, a revealer of new laws, and as a consequence, a founder of a civilization. That's the pattern. God sends a messenger with powerful new teachings, which become the basis for a civilization roughly 200 to 300 years later, according to the pattern we see throughout history. Anything to add, Michael?
Absolutely. Well spoken, Chris. Thank you.
Anything to add, Todd? Can you put?
Uh, uh, well, I had something a minute ago, but because I'm older than religion itself, it has flown out of my mind. So I don't know. Thank you for asking. If it comes up, I'll send you a note.
Thank you, Todd.
Thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you. What are some of the valuable perspectives from the ways of seeing by those with two eyes that contribute to our advancement?
Michael, before I turn it over to you, I want to say I'm the left eye, which makes Michael the right eye. Okay.
This is the ongoing joke between the two of us. I'm glad we still have this. Yeah, I love this repertoire we have. Chris, yes, thank you for making me the right eye. This is absolutely invaluable. And from the very beginning, when Chris and I undertook this research, he mentioned the two-eyed seeing, and it was a revelation, and is something that I will continue to pursue and integrate in my own writings and research. That is absolutely much needed. And I thank Chris for raising this and for continuing to underscore the importance of two-eye seeing. You can see if you haven't read, but when you do read the article, the different perspectives that each of us brought. Chris, from his experience, his as a number of years researching and writing, my own from writing, but my own from living this experience was made it absolutely invaluable. And when you have both of these perspectives come together, it's truly eye-opening. And I hope that we can reflect that in the writing that we share this article.
I might add that two I'd seen is not a formal methodology with a discrete framework of analysis, but is dependent on context, on discipline, on goals, on the nature of the research itself. It is evolving, but it is something that in principle has become the bedrock for, and I think the future direction for all research pertaining to all things Indigenous.
Absolutely, 100% agree. Yes. And I'm just to add back, going back to what I mentioned before about some texts not being authenticated or authorized, it's because of that, right? And as Chris said, going forward, this is why it's so important so that we can have those authorized texts and we can confirm those beliefs and perspectives. Thanks.
Next question is, could you comment on the medicine path?
That is a very general question because each and every tradition has its own medicine path. So it'd be hard for me to explain what a medicine path is outside of my own. So we have to be very careful about using general statements. We are all individual, over 500 of us in the America alone. As I mentioned, over 500 million of us around the world, and each indigenous community, each indigenous society has its own medicine path. So it'd be it would be limiting to mention that without having further ideas or discussions upon that. So I just emphasize the need to really be careful of how we use these general terms because we are such a diverse group around the world.
Can you talk about the Great Law of Peace, the teachings that formed the Iroquois and that inspired the constitutions of the United States?
Yeah, Chris, as you mentioned before, why don't you go ahead and continue, I think, on some road.
Well, when we say as part of the question, from my experience as an attorney, would you read the last part of the question?
Yeah, could you talk about the Great Law of Peace, the teachings that formed the Iroquois that inspired the Constitution of the United States?
Objection, Your Honor. Begging the question. So begging the question refers to a statement that is contained as part of the question. And not to say that the question is poorly phrased at all, but to point out that there's something called the Iroquois influence thesis that is hotly debated over the question as to whether or not the Haudenosaunee teachings from the Iroquois Confederacy, the League of Nations, which began as 5 and expanded to 6, and then, as I wrote later on, expanded to 10, and I want to get back to that in a minute. Whether or not this influenced the founding fathers. Proponents of the Iroquois influence thesis, the idea that the first New World democracy influenced the formation of American democracy, they often quote Benjamin Franklin in support, and also a speech of a Native American diplomat and so on. So there's evidence for and against. That said, there was an act of Congress, I can't remember which year, and I believe a resolution that passed, and I believe a special coin that was minted acknowledging the Haudenosaunee or Iroquois contribution to American values and governance. As to the Great Law of Peace itself, there are several versions that are published. The most easily accessible are online, versions that are online. But the White Roots of Peace, a short book that's still in print, I believe, the White Roots of Peace contain those laws. The laws are set forth in great detail and concerning the League. And then, more broadly speaking, there are also the spiritual and organizational and social laws brought by other Indigenous messengers of God, notably white buffalo calf women. And in one of our 73 articles that the late Kevin Locke and I collaborated on in the wonderful series Indigenous Messengers of God, which you can Google online, remember 109 articles. We have an article on the white buffalo calf woman's 10 commandments. So you can check those out too. So that's my short answer to that excellent question.
The next question is, doesn't applying universality while still including localized Jewish prophets who spoke specifically to Israelis seem to be a double standard in relating to indigenous revelations?
Would you read that again?
Doesn't applying universality while still including localized Jewish prophets who spoke specifically to Israelis seem to be a double standard in relating to indigenous revelations?
Well, throughout religious history, most of the immediate audiences were local. And then as the religion spread, if it was a missionary religion, let me interpose a principle here, a statement. At the beginning of the semester, when I used to teach courses on world religions, I told my students that basically there are two types of religions from one perspective: ethnic and missionary. So when you take a look at a religion and you see that, let's say you have to be born into it to be a member of it, that would be a religion of the ethnic variety. And then a universal one would be one that accepts non-ethnic adherents. Judaism represents a mixture of both, from my understanding. In the times before Christ, briefly before Christ, Judaism was a missionary religion. It accepted non-Jewish converts. It was known for its wisdom. But then, after the two Jewish revolts against Rome, it became dangerous for Christians, especially, to associate themselves with Judaism. So it depends on the time and circumstance. There is no double standard with respect to comparing the universal teachings of Jewish messengers of God who had a universal message to indigenous messengers of God, from my understanding, from my perspective. Michael, do you want to add to that?
Thank you. That's great. No.
What does honoring Indigenous spiritual heritage look like in practice today, beyond appreciation, especially for non-Indigenous Baha'is?
Oh, that's a wonderful question, and that's something I think we touched on in the last slide. And there's more on this in the article, and something that I've written in the past. And it's about first and foremost listening to understand, listening to acknowledge, listening to appreciate the indigenous perspectives and history, and the spirituality and the ceremonies that exist, to truly understand who we are as a people, not what you've read or what you've heard, but from who you met and who you've got to know and who is your friend. Not your colleague, not your acquaintance, but your friend. And it's about sharing, and it's about understanding and truly getting to know that person, to seeing their perspectives, and to understand that it's a basic understanding. It's not rocket science. It's hard, but it's a wonderful and important question, and something we talk about, that hopefully this article will lead to that opportunity for Indigenous and non-Indigenous communities to truly reflect on that and come together and appreciate that. And if I could just add one more important aspect of this, and looking at the tablet, Chris and I have talked about this, and it's also written in the tablet, that the tablet is absolutely powerful in so many fronts. The primary significance, I would say, is absolutely, it's a revolutionary challenge to the historical narrative. Not just the way that we include Indigenous prophets to progressive revelation, but it truly, truly, looking at what Abdu'l-Bahá said and done, reconstructs Indigenous settler relationships. Historically, this has changed. This is huge. This is absolutely important from an Indigenous perspective, because in the past we've often heard and read how colonials, those European settlers, brought forth understanding and divine wisdom and shared this with the Indigenous population. But what Abdu'l-Bahá is saying, and what our article is saying, that it again fundamentally reconstructs Indigenous settler relations by positioning Native peoples as bearers of divine guidance, as absolute bearers of divine guidance. That we are sharing, that we are part of this process. We were not just on the recipient end of this process. And so I just want to make sure that people understand that as well. And I think that's, from an Indigenous perspective, that's is absolutely one of the most important aspects that I get from this important article.
If I may add, Kevin Locke, the late Kevin Locke, offered a prayer, which is a spiritual Indigenous land acknowledgement. This was presented to the Parliament of the World's Religions, I believe in 2021, by the Patrician Locke Foundation in a pre-recorded video that was 45 minutes long. And if you Google Kevin Locke, Parliament of World Religions, or Patricia Locke Foundation, you should bring it up and we can send out, if there's a question, we can offer the link. There was a recent, I think 2025, this year, gathering of Indigenous Baha'is at Wilmette. And from the story that I read, I was not there personally because I'm a non-Indigenous, what's called ally of Indigenous peoples. It began with a land acknowledgement. This is a widely done practice that I think that non-Indigenous people can do. This is an answer to the excellent question in acknowledgement and appreciation of Indigenous peoples. But typically land acknowledgements are political. So what Kevin Locke had done, we came up with this together in our collaboration, is he offered a spiritual land acknowledgement, which lists some of the wise ones, to use the language of the Universal House of Justice, in his letter to the Baha'i Conference in Ganado, which was a beautiful letter. Excellent question.
Absolutely, excellent, absolutely. Chris mentioned Ganado and some of the history of our Indigenous peoples, Kevin and his important land acknowledgement. And since he mentioned Ganado, it made me think of the time my parents were co-directors of the Native American Baha'i Institute back on the Navajo reservation. I am not, and they are not Navajo. My mother is of is of Yaqui ancestry, and my father is Chehe'ende, which is from southern New Mexico, Apache. And I will just add that one of the things that Chris and I talked about, and it's also in the article, is the fact that during their time as co-directors, it might have been the first time that only indigenous peoples came together to talk about this statement and the tablet to Amir Khan and the important confirmations and writings that Abdu'l-Bahá stated and promised the indigenous believers here in the U.S. And it was not just it was specifically because it was geographically done that my parents as indigenous peoples and the indigenous population, mostly Navajo in that region, and a few others from outside of Arizona came to study these texts and came to understand them. And as Chris and I are doing more research, and I'm continuing to do more research, this may have been the first time that this was an all indigenous event that came together on the grounds of the Native American Baha'i Institute to study these important writings and prophecies. Thank you.
Okay, well, it looks like that's all the time we have. So thank you so much again to both of you for your talk and for answering our questions. That was a really great talk.
Thank you.
Thank you. And so our speaker next week will be Dr. Hector Balcazar, and his talk will be about raising spiritual consciousness from the ashes of human suffering, a Baha'i perspective. And again, these talks are every Saturday at noon Eastern time, and I've put the link to our mailing list and our YouTube channel in the chat. Thank you, everyone, and hope you have a great week. We'll see you next week. Bye.